Hello and welcome to Eavesdropping at the Movies. I'm Mike.
And I'm José.
And we've just been to see The Odyssey.
Yes.
Christopher Nolan's latest epic, nudging 3 hours long. The first film ever shot entirely with IMAX film cameras.
Mm-hmm.
IMAX has been kind of expanding what it wants people to call an IMAX film in recent years. So there are various digital cameras that have a kind of IMAX approved label on them. But IMAX film is a whole different beast, and it's what IMAX, the name, really should be, associated with. It's the full kind of 7-story high screen, different aspect ratio. And Christopher Nolan is the greatest proponent of this film system. And so since, I think The Dark Knight might have been the first film he shot partially in IMAX, just certain sequences. And ever since then, he's been increasing gradually the amount of IMAX film that he uses to the point where he's now made a film entirely with that. And that's unusual. I mean, obviously it's unusual. It's the first one ever, but it's unlikely. For one thing, it's very expensive. For another, it's very hard to shoot IMAX, especially dialogue, because the cameras are incredibly loud. We were just reading that for dialogue scenes here, may have also been the case with Oppenheimer last time, which is obviously even more dialogue heavy than this. They were using kind of soundproof devices to hide the cameras in, mirrors. A lot of work has gone into making this. Unfortunately, we haven't seen it in full IMAX. We've seen it in IMAX Digital, so it's a wider aspect ratio. The top and bottom the screen is kind of missing. Obviously, it's been reframed and panned and scanned in order to get the composition that best suits that. But we were talking before we saw it about, and we've talked about this before. We definitely talked about it in Tenet about making a film where you're framing for 2 different screens at once. Even more than that, because in a conventional, regular cinema that's not IMAX labelled. I think the aspect ratio is different again. It's like 185. We were watching it more, something like 2:1, whatever it was. There's differences. And I think when we talked about Tenet, I was kind of defending, saying, well, maybe there are things you can do, maybe. And when we got into the film here, I was kind of thinking, this is fine. But there are definitely things you think I'd be missing here. And actually, the idea that this is a film which you can only properly see at a handful of locations around the world is something I feel less positive towards than I used to. It's still such a treat to go to an IMAX cinema and treat yourself to that big event. But if you're not going to do that, you are seeing an impoverished version of the final product, I think.
Yes, though, I think we talked a little bit about this before. I saw an interview with Nolan where he was asked, do you mind if people see your films on a phone? And he says no, right? So I think... And I think that is just the culture that we live in. I mean, there are ideal ways of seeing things, and less than ideal ways of seeing things, and that is what people do. I mean, I was a bit annoyed with a friend on Facebook who said, "Oh, I'll wait for it to come out on TV," and my response was, "Why don't you watch it on your phone when it does?" I mean, yeah. So I do think it's important to, if you're kind of receiving the film as a work of art, to try to receive it in the way that its makers kind of think is the best possible way of viewing it.
But you will be doing in like a month or two when you go down in August.
I'm going to go see it in London in IMAX, which is now ostensibly sold out.
I was looking at tickets, sold out until at least September. All the dates that were available had sold out, so until they add more dates. I must say, after having seen it this once, there are definitely things that you will get out of that proper presentation. I don't think I'll be making a trip to see it. If it was in Birmingham, definitely, but we don't have that in Birmingham anymore. It doesn't appeal to me to take a trip to see it.
Well, I loved it, and I am looking forward to seeing it.
Yeah.
And actually, I think I loved it so much that I think I might even be seeing it in different formats. I think I'm going to try and see it on 35, which the Work Arts Centre is showing every evening at 7 for the next little while. So I thought it was beautiful. I thought, the image had... I can't quite put my finger on it because it's kind of like a texture. So, like the skins on people feel like so deep, the skin, right? So it's, and it has a clarity which is very different than that digital type of clarity where you see every hair on somebody's face. Here you don't, actually. Right? So it's kind of more of a glossy texture, depth. Right? But I thought that was like almost like an aesthetic thrill on its own. You know, not to speak of everything else, because I thought the costumes, you know, were like a work of art, really. And the design was like a work of art. And yeah, and I loved all the actors, actually. I was thinking, Tom Holland, yeah, he seems a bit callow, really. But then, of course, you think, well, he is meant to be, right? Like, you know.
What do you mean callow?
Callow, like, not heroic enough, too youthful and a bit immature, and yeah.
I did see a thing. It was an interview where he was in an interview with Matt Damon and maybe Anne Hathaway, and he was talking about playing Telemachus as kind of 16 years old.
Yes.
And Matt Damon goes, "Where'd you get that from? If he's 2 when Odysseus leaves, and it's 20 years before he gets back, then shouldn't he be 22?" And you can see him kind of calculating in his head, like, "Oh, maybe I fucked this up." And there is something like, I did actually find his performance a little too youthful about it. You know, he's someone who should be coming into adulthood, trying to take something for himself, but he is, but he is a little too childish about it. He's a little too, you know, like trying to fight with the grown-ups, with the Robert Pattinson character, and not being able to match them. It's like, well, it plays differently if he's thinking about it as 6 years older than he was playing it as.
Yeah, I don't know. I didn't have... I mean, I had the same thought, but then, you know, I thought it made sense within the narrative, right? He can't defend his mother at the beginning, right? He's on a search for the father, but he's at the mercy of everyone else, right? I think the last scene where he's meant to come more into his own, you know, I think that could have been a bit different, but I actually think those are also directorial choices, right? That it takes him so long to kind of get there. Plus the story, he's not meant to do anything. So I liked him, you know, and I could go through all of them. I thought Robert Pattinson was fantastic. I thought Anne Hathaway, who I have very mixed responses to, I don't always like her. She can be too actressy, right? I thought she was fantastic. I thought seeing Elliot Page at the beginning, you know, in the role that he does, to me, was fantastic. I mean, I can't fault anyone, really, and I enjoyed it so much. I was completely gripped throughout. I mean, it's a 3-hour story, and it's kind of, you know, not only one of those mythic stories, but it's kind of like a mythic story that for thousands of years has been a kind of, Bible is too strong a word for it, but a kind of a book that offers insights about what to do, how to behave, what the world is, the fates.
I can't claim to have read it.
No, neither have I.
Okay.
I mean, I did wonder whether I had at some point. Like, I'm almost kind of, I'd be surprised if I hadn't dipped into it at some point, right? But anyway, I can't remember it, so I can't claim to. But I think that, you know, the film certainly kind of offers that as well.
I can take issue with the actors. I had trouble with... I think Robert Pattinson is very good, and I liked him very much. Anne Hathaway, I can see what you're responding to. I thought her... feels like she's had so much Botox that she can't emote.
I disagree. I entirely. And actually, I was surprised of the opposite. I was surprised to see an actress her age, right? Though I think we did talk last time that she's been a star now for over a quarter of a century, right? But, you know, there were all those little lines around the eyes and little lines around the side of her mouth, right? Which
I saw the opposite.
Sorry?
I saw the opposite. I saw no lines. I saw lines that refused to move when she needed to be emoting, when she needed her face to crease.
Okay, well, we can disagree on that because I definitely saw those lines. And I actively thought, you know, that an actress in her place at this moment in her life would have had Botox and not shown that, right? Because those are actually the things that are easy to cover with Botox, right? Those little lines around the eyes and below the eyes and around the mouth. Yeah, and that is, you know, what you saw. True, not in every angle, but my God, you know, she was behind the screen for half the movie.
Well,
Right.
I was talking about the bits where you can see her face clearly. I mean, I agree with you on the performance that she's giving. You know, I think she is selling everything that she needs to sell with the force and the personality and all of that. But I feel like it wasn't coming across as well as it might have. I think Tom Holland, you know, people have been kind of talking about this as like a test for him, you know, because he's clearly got charisma, style, but you know, he's very good as Spider-Man. It's impossible to imagine someone else as Spider-Man now, even though they are putting all the old Spider-Mens in film together.
He's the best one.
He's wonderful, and he has all of this youth and vitality. And when we saw Uncharted, which again was kind of a test, can he do something outside Spider-Man? Well, certainly he can. He made that work.
He's a star.
But the question of can he act in a quote-unquote proper film, I don't think he offered enough. Now, maybe there's too little for the character to do. That's possibly true. But, you know, to me, it was at its clearest when he realises that the beggar who comes back is his father because the dog recognises his smell, lets him touch him. You know, he goes, "Oh, you're." That should be, although he can't express it because he still has to keep the secret, you should feel.
I did feel.
No, I don't feel it from him. I found him very blank. I didn't think he...
I mean, I thought that was very interestingly handled, let me put it that way, because I thought it risked being overly cute, right? Because there's a glint in his eye, almost like a wink when he understands, and like a little kind of, you know, I thought that was being overly maybe cutesy, really. But I thought he conveyed it, you know, entirely, and I thought it was very moving, you know, especially on Matt Damon's lines, and your father would have been very proud of you or whatever. I was very touched by it.
Not moving enough to me.
No, I was.
I want to feel, and you know, there's that thing we've talked about before about how, you know, I think it's a Michael Caine thing about women will cry, men will do anything but cry, and that itself is an extremely emotionally affecting thing when you see someone trying their best to keep it in. Well, I didn't see them trying to keep it in. I just saw them having this understanding and kind of agreeing to it, and it's trying to sell you on this reunion, and I didn't buy it at all. I didn't go for it. It didn't work on me.
It did on me, so
I just kind of had these troubles throughout the film. Kind of when it comes to the sort of structuring. So the film is told non-chronologically, and I think it's a really smart decision, and it works
fantastic,
very well. One thing Christopher Nolan, in my opinion, is extremely good at is starting his films. Not enough kind of, you know, people always talk about endings of films and can you get it right and stuff, and that can be difficult. But the start of a film, how do you get a story going? You don't say hello and welcome to the Odyssey. Christopher Nolan gets into his films so fast. You're in the middle of it. People are talking to each other. They already know each other. You're having to catch up with them, and it just starts moving. You know, he does this with all his films. I think he's very, very good at it. And this film just starts moving. It starts off with actually, I think Travis Scott is a guy. I think is he a rapper? Travis Scott.
I don't know.
Who's telling the story, and you know, so much of the film is structured around telling the story, which I think is a nod to the oral tradition that the Odyssey and the Iliad were, you know, passed down through for so long. People are telling the stories about where they came from, and then you go into, you know, you're told this as in flashback essentially, but they tell it for so long that when you get back to the guy who's telling the story, like, oh yeah, that was a flashback. You know, you just get right into the past of it.
Well, I think it's a bit more complicated than that, if I remember correctly, because the thing is, the film keeps going backwards and forwards.
Yeah.
It's almost like memory, the way that it's structured. You know, and I thought that was one of the film's great achievements.
It is, yeah.
Because, you know, you feel that you know exactly where you are.
You're never lost in it.
You're never lost in it. And yet what it's doing is very complex. It's kind of moving from one time to another, from one consciousness to another. Yeah. Kind of, you know, the story's not linear. It's told via various people, really. Yeah,
and it's doing it kind of, it's cutting and editing who it's telling you about or the time it's telling you about on kind of thematic lines and emotional lines, as opposed to, if you know, just chronological lines, because obviously it's not doing it chronologically. Works extremely well, and I think one of the reasons that works so well, there's this kind of well-known sort of internet review, I think it's on Amazon, of Pride and Prejudice, where someone wrote, it's just a bunch of people going to each other's houses. And this is kind of like just a bunch of people going to each other's islands for a while. And if you're telling it chronologically, I think you would feel a lack of drive in that. It's just, you know, you've had 10 years of the Trojan War, now you have 10 years of trying to get home, and it's quite directionless for quite a while when they're doing that.
I didn't think so.
I think so.
I found it completely absorbing, and I think each episode has its own challenges and kind of immorality and things that become kind of clear later on. So, for example, you know, the death of Elliot Page in the Trojan Horse on the beach. Like, you know, to me, kind of all of it becomes kind of clear only subsequently, right? When
it's by design, right? They tell you more about, you know, what their character is and who.
You know, I realize that.
Yeah.
You know.
No.
I'm just saying, you know, that's kind of what makes it very absorbing to me. That kind of, you know, this information is rational. It comes at different places, and yet, kind of each episode has, you know, like a different theme almost, and you know, a kind of a different lesson to teach you. I mean, you know, the scenes with kind of, you know, Charlize Theron, whether she's some mythical creature.
She's Calypso.
Yeah, who's tricking him or drugging him,
Yeah.
you know, into kind of staying with her or choosing her.
She's a nymph.
Yeah, and actually I thought that was like so wonderful, the way that, you know, this classical kind of story now plays into kind of tropes of, you know, PTSD and drug taking as oblivion, and yeah.
I think the film tries to pull a fast one on you and telling you at the end that it was about PTSD all along, because when Odysseus is on the steps and he's talking to his wife, not having kind of revealed himself, but he is sort of doing so, and you get that kind of full flashback, what really happened in Troy. You know, I don't think you felt it before. That's when you see, this is the shit we got up to in Troy. Like, we were killing everyone, women, children, civilians, everyone, and that's when it's the imagined Athena, who we keep seeing, played by Zendaya, is contextualized as an innocent Trojan who he saw beheaded purposely, who begged with her eyes, you know, for them not to do it. And I'm going, yeah, I can see how there is a fitting metaphor here, the struggles and the trials that you go through, the only going home. You know, he says at the start, homecomings are a difficult thing, kind of thing, like coming home to to where you live after having been through some of that. I get this, but I think you are doing the film a favour by, not you personally, I think one is doing the film a favour by allowing it to contextualise everything, just by showing you at the end what we actually did in Troy, and going, oh, okay, well, I guess that makes sense then. You haven't made the rest of the film about this.
Well, because I do think it is in the rest of the film. I mean, I was referring to the example of Charlize Theron without even having in mind, that explanation at the end, right? You know, because that whole episode is done almost like kind of a sunlit paradise, right? Like where, you know, everything is beautiful, the landscape is beautiful, she's beautiful, right? But I think, and, you know, he's, you know, ostensibly happy with her, and so on. They talk about that, you know, but basically it's clear that his taking of the lotus flower is some kind of, you know, metaphor for what contemporary, you know, drug taking, would be. I mean, it is a drug. It does, and, you know, Charlize Theron explains it at that moment. It kind of, it dulls the will and the memory or something.
Clouds the mind. He can't remember anything.
Exactly.
But still, the person he is inside is still there, and it can't disguise that, which is why she eventually has to admit that she has to let him go.
So I read that entirely as a man dealing with PTSD, right? You know, so before you get to to that ending, and I like that very much, right? And I like the way, you know, that all of these ancient themes are then kind of rendered legible through contemporary concerns. Right, so, you know, the thing about Circe, you know, and turning the men into pigs, and you know, and kind of all of that really is kind of, you know, such an obvious kind of commentary on contemporary sexism and so on. And indeed Penelope's discussion with him, have I not been a queen for 20 years, right? The same, right? So I think kind of, you know, the film is a kind of a wonderful deployment of like these classical stories, which have ceaselessly through the centuries kind of been used as kind of runes through which to read contemporary life, continue to work in that way, and I think very effectively.
I think Circe works very interestingly. I think Samantha Morton's performance is interesting.
It's fantastic.
She rules this island where she lives, which has got a lion on it, a panther, a tiger. What's going on here? And when the soldiers approach her, even though they say we're coming in peace, all we want is food, she's terrified and scared, and you have this image of a woman who is responding very viscerally to the threat of a man. It's like it's I think it's super gendered. It's not he's like, okay, he's a soldier, he's not just any man, but it plays as she is terrified for herself as a woman. I think it comes across.
It does.
But then it reveals she has all of this power that she uses on them, and I guess I struggle with the interpretation of it, because was she really scared for herself? Was she playing a part? Went to lure them in? For what purpose? Is she someone who has been abused and has taken taken power back on all these people she's turned into animals? And
she's got she's got some of her lines kind of explain that, really. So I think to me there's kind of no question of that, because she says, "You men."
Yeah. The way I think it kind of rounds off quite nicely with the way she plays the character at the end, once she's been convinced by Odysseus to turn them back into men and let them go, because she has this kind of humbled look about her. She didn't have to do any of that. But she did. Yeah.
I think it's clear in the film that she is vulnerable, in the sense that she's a witch, right? Yeah, but she can only turn the men into animals by feeding them meat.
Yeah. So
right?
there's a kind of potion aspect.
So from that moment where they walk into the island with their armor and their weapons, and unless kind of they decide to leave their armor outside and eat, she is vulnerable.
Yeah.
So anyway, I love that scene very much. I love the scene with the Cyclops, with the monster and the sheep in the cave. That was a real Ray
Harryhausen, and it's certainly heavily inspired by his work. And from what I understand, they built like a 40-foot puppet that is, the reason that some of it looks a bit slow, but also quite real. There is something to respond to in that scene.
I love it.
I mean, people like Christopher Nolan has this reputation for not using CGI, an overblown reputation, because how else did he do the fucking city folding in on itself in Inception? But he avoids it where he can, it seems. And people were saying with the Odyssey, well, how is he going to do a Cyclops? How are these things going to work? Obviously, there is definitely computer-generated imagery involved in that. You see the look of the face, the way the eye blinks, like there's digital manipulation involved here to make it look that good. But he's also using traditional means to get what he wants.
It looks fantastic, and it's a wonderful episode, really. I mean, I thought they all were, like, the thing in the ship where, that rock begins to have arms and pick up men, and he knew this but didn't tell his crew.
Yeah, Scylla.
Yeah, I mean, so, what is your responsibility to the collectivity? How can people be sacrificed, or can people be sacrificed? Yeah, it raises kind of all of those moral questions, really, I think, in kind of, very interesting ways.
I didn't really think so, I must say, although I can see what you're responding to, and I don't think there is no reason to say that. But one thing I was thinking was, so much is based on kind of prophecy. They go to he has that interesting episode where he visits Hades, and he doesn't go down to Hades. It's this kind of liminal space on Earth. In fact, they even say like a river of ice meets a river of fire, and that's what you mean. It's literally liminal, and the shades, the dead, return to him and speak to him, and that's where he gets his prophecy about things will happen. And he's been told in private, if you do this, everyone dies. If you do this, some survive. That kind of thing. And one thing that what that gives you is a great sense of dramatic irony, because you are told something will happen, you see it happen, and you see people knowing that it will happen or not knowing that it will happen, but you have all that information, and it's like very basic kind of dramatic irony that works extremely well. That's what a story that's based on kind of prophecy gives you, because I don't think there's ever any sense in the film that you will break a prophecy by acting differently. You can't get round the will of the gods. They're going to get what they want. to the extent that the gods are real, because this is a film in which...
Oh, the gods are real in this film.
Well, this is a film in which, he says at the start, in that opening intertitle, in an age of apparent magic, right? And we do get a massive Cyclops. We do get the giants, the Laestrygonians, I think they're called, who kill a load of them and chase them off the beach. We do get Circe and her magic turning them into pigs. And you get
sirens and nymphs. And
so we've got all of this, but we don't see a god. The image of Athena is not confirmed to be real Athena. It's an image that he has that we see the basis of. The thing
I think for me there was no question that it was Athena.
The thing with Polyphemus, the Cyclops, is changed from the poem in which, I forget exactly how it goes, but Odysseus uses this clever pun. He says, "Nobody, I'm nobody, nobody blinded you," and then when he leaves, pride gets the best of him, and he says, "I'm Odysseus," and Polyphemus asks his father Poseidon to curse Odysseus. Now I know your name. And none of that happens here. That's avoided. And I don't really know why that's avoided, because that episode is about, in the poem at least, is about Odysseus's pride, and hubris. And he is proud in this, and he is arrogant, at least at the start, and it would fit perfectly. I don't know why it's not there. I don't know if it's just that maybe they were worried it was too silly to have the nobody pun in there, but it works. I don't know why they didn't. Odysseus then goes on to say, in telling the story, I think to Calypso, every wave that we hit was taken by the men as a sign that Poseidon was angry. It's not the same as saying Poseidon cursed us. That's how the men interpreted it. You're obviously going to hit waves at sea, you're going to get into storms, but they saw it as punishment from the gods. You also get this thing that my understanding of the classics and the way the Greeks kind of thought is shaky, but my understanding of the way they thought about the gods is that, these are kind of people, right? The idea of omniscience, I don't think is really associated with the classic gods. That comes in more with monotheism and Judeo-Christianity, the idea that God knows everything. So what you have in the poem is Polyphemus saying to Poseidon, "Do this to Odysseus." What you have here is Poseidon just knows because he's a god, and that kind of takes away. I think it's an incomplete understanding of what.
I think you're making it too binary. I mean, the fact that the gods in all the Greek stories and mythologies do predict the future. They will tell you this will happen, right? So it's not the kind of monotheistic idea that like past, present, and future are all in God's mind, the medieval kind of view of Christianity. But not, and then it's not that way because they have many gods, right?
Exactly, and then fighting each other all the time. And
exactly, but kind of these prophecies do exist, right? And they do happen, right? So kind of that is in the middle of this chaos, really. And I like that. And I thought one of the things that was very interesting about the film, unlike other films of this type, is that the only god you see is Athena, right? And she's almost used symbolically, right? Like, she's next to Odysseus. Yeah, and the full reason why she's next to Odysseus is kind of only revealed later on, where he finally acquires the wisdom, that Athena is kind of goddess of. But, you would expect, like, the god of the sea, or Hades, or Zeus, or, like, other types of films of this would, Clash of the Titans, they all appear, right?
Yeah.
So I thought kind of this was, like, a very interesting, very clever kind of storytelling device, that you don't see them, and the only one you see is kind of almost a metaphor. Yeah.
Well, that's exactly what I'm saying, really, that I think this is a film that is not going hell for leather on saying the gods are real. It is giving you the ability to think of them as real, and it's giving you the ability to think of the things that you see as interpretable as being done by the gods, or so like I say, when they hit waves, you can ascribe that to Poseidon if you want, or you can ascribe it to it happens at sea, which it does. And it's not going down either route. So when you see Athena contextualized at the end as a real person,
I would I would say slightly different, actually, because for me, the fact that Athena is kind of used metaphorically doesn't negate the fact that in this world that we're shown, the gods are real, and nobody disputes it. You know.
They all believe in them, but that's not the same as they are real.
Well, it is the same in the sense that kind of what the film shows you is in fact what the prophecies say, and nobody disputes it.
Yeah.
Right. So, yeah.
Yeah.
So I think there's something else behind making Athena symbolic, or behind not showing the gods. Yeah, actually, maybe they have more power. Maybe they're more mysterious. And it's interesting that you're shown nymphs and sirens and cyclops and but that the only god you see goddess is Zendaya, which I think is quite appropriate.
Well, because she's so beautiful.
She's so beautiful, and she's so
godlike.
smart. Yeah, you can. She exudes a kind of wisdom as well in her star persona. Actually, I mean, I thought it was kind of interesting to cast Charlize Theron and Zendaya. I mean, Charlize Theron is not quite a goddess in the film, is she? But
No, a nymph.
Yeah, she's a nymph. But to have
and not even told to us, and the sirens are told to us as and shown to us as having some crazy power because of what they do to
they lure men to their death.
To Odysseus when he hears their song. But what we're shown of Calypso is she's able to use a potion, basically, or potion and a flower to chemically subdue Odysseus and his memories for 7 years. So whether she has some powers, hard to know, but there's kind of the question of being together eternally. That's something that she says, well, maybe she can, and he says that there's no such thing as eternity. It's all up in the air. It's all left to your interpretation. It's the film doesn't really tell you this is real, and even the stuff about Cyclops, the giants, the sirens.
I think in the film's terms, that's all real to this world that we're shown.
It could all be stories.
Well, they're clearly all stories as well, right? But I think in the film's narrative, those are things that happen. They exist.
Yeah.
So
let's talk about another god because he comes up a lot, which is Zeus. They talk about Zeus's law a lot. So Zeus doesn't appear in the way that Athena might. They refer to him during a thunderstorm at sea. Zeus turned up as well. They sort of say. But Zeus's law comes up a lot, and this is again something that is kind of common to the classics, ancient Greek sort of culture, and I think it's told to us in a slightly muddied way. It's explained to us twice at the start in two different ways. One is that it's about hospitality. Don't turn people away because they might be a god in disguise. Again, this is something you get a lot less once you get into the Judeo-Christian era, is the idea of someone turning up in disguise and they turn out to be a god, just walking around. No, this is something that happens a lot in the classics. The gods turn up as people, or they turn up as swans, or whatever. So it's about the kind of fear of retribution. Because it's not. I don't think it comes across as it's the right thing to treat a god well. It's the wrong thing to treat a god badly because they will hurt you, is the implication, I think. The other way it's explained is in a more general, the golden rule way. Yes. Do unto others as you would be done by. And at least in the film's terms, I don't think these quite match up because what is not told to us about Zeus's law in the first sense, the hospitality sense, is you should also be a good guest. So all the suitors who were there to try and win Penelope because everyone thinks Odysseus is dead, they're eating her out of house and home and have been for years and years. And the onus is always on the hosts to not turn them away. Any of them could be a god who will offer their retribution. There's no onus on the guests to reciprocate.
Well, I think the film works with that because, I read Zeus's law as kind of a metaphor for law and order.
Yeah.
Yeah, because once people stop following Zeus's law, I think what the narrator tells you, there'll be 500 years of barbarism as a result of this. The world descends into barbarism.
Yeah, I mean, there's talk about, in other places, like Sparta and wherever, there's talk of all this stuff coming because Zeus's law was broken down.
Exactly. Yeah. So, and I think that does apply to the guests as well, because actually, you know, what you see is the guests constantly breaking that rule, that they're terrible guests and they have terrible intentions, and
they do eventually get their comeuppance.
And they do get their comeuppance, right? So, you know, so I think it's, again, you know, my thing about the film being so interesting, you know, aside from being so beautiful and kind of, you know, moving so well, I wasn't bored at all. That it kind of brings up these stories in a way that's kind of cohesive, you know, and legible, and then kind of, you know, makes it as kind of refracts it into contemporary life. Yeah, lends itself to contemporary readings in very, very interesting ways, you know. And you know, I mean, people were saying, oh, it's a woke film. It is, you know, it uses trans issues and, you know, race and kind of women's issues and kind of, you know, well, they were always in there, in this story, but kind of, again, you know, kind of weaves them seamlessly into the story of a man trying to return to his wife. I think the whole thing of marital love in the film is very beautiful as well. And, you know, this search for the father, yeah, the kind of, that, you know, those two threads are kind of united. So I loved it.
Christopher Nolan has done a bit of that before with the, you know, wanting your dad back at a distance for a long time. Interstellar comes to mind.
Yes. This, to me, is the film that I've enjoyed the most, because, you know, I'm not a Christopher Nolan fan at all. They're not the kinds of films that I rewatch whenever they're on television, really. I mean, recently I have been watching the Dark Knight films again, but it's almost like, you know, you watch them with one eye cocked, really, rather than being absorbed by them. So, I mean, he's a filmmaker that I admire more than I like. Yeah, and this is, you know, I think the first film that I've just unabashedly, like, kind of
It's interesting.
enjoyed.
What do you think of the action?
Because
he is, you know, his track record with action, it's one of the things he gets criticised for the most, is the way he shoots action. Shoots and edits.
Okay, I liked most of it except for actually the final scene where Matt Damon is supposed to kill everybody, right? And then I did wonder if maybe the ratio was part of what was preventing me from enjoying it as much as possible. You could imagine how those scenes would play kind of very different, you know, on a more square kind of ratio. The add-in on a kind of a narrower widescreen.
Possibly so.
But I don't know.
There are things we've talked about Nolan's editing before. We did a whole summer where we watched a lot of his films because Cineworld was showing everything in the run up to Tenet coming out. They were trying to get people back in the cinemas in the COVID era. And I remember when we saw The Dark Knight, I was talking about how much I liked. There's about a 10 to 15 minute section which is just one action set piece after another. They flow into each other, including the kind of big car chase. And you were decrying the way it was shot and looking at the rest of it. And I was saying there's something, you know, there is a sense of pace and structure to it that is really carrying me through. It's just you are gone, you know, and you're with it. And there are things here where the intensity of what you're seeing is so great. The storm on the boat where you are, it flashes bright white with lightning, and the whole cinema lights up for a split second. You get an afterglow in your eyes, you know, an after image. So intense. The music and sound is doing a hell of a lot of work there, by the way. You know, I think as intense as what you're watching is, it wouldn't be half as good and intense were it not for the sound amplifying it. I think this is true for the scene at the end as well, which I had real problems with because the music is great. It's drums, boom, 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 and constantly going. That raise everything. And were it not for that, if you watch that silently, you know, a film should work silently. You know, it should work visually. I think it would struggle, that scene, because the intensity is so heavily derived from the sound, and there's intensity derived from the speed of the editing as well. But I won't use the word incoherent about it. It's not incoherent. You know where you are, but it is.
But it's not
exciting enough. It's not clear enough. There's too little sense. You know, Christopher Nolan visually is kind of interesting because there are times when you can tell he has an image in his head. You know, the image of the Trojan horse on the beach. You know, it's like straight out of Planet of the Apes. There are times when you go, I've composed this.
It's also straight out of, I forget where it is, but there's this town in Scotland, or maybe on the north, which I visited, And there is a horse almost exactly like that. That's a major tourist attraction.
Right. So there are times like that. That the beheading of the Athena statue and the head bounce downstairs. You can tell that this is the image I have. I need this to be presented the way I see it. And there are lots of times when you can tell he's happy for performance to drive everything. And where the camera goes and the way that we edit is derived from what makes the performances work. In fact, we even talked about that, I think, in Oppenheimer, because you mentioned the Criterion Closet, which he was on with Cillian Murphy. And Cillian Murphy was talking about a director, I forget who doesn't have any marks, kind of lets you stand where you want, is happy to play around, doesn't really have, doesn't have a place for the camera. And he says to Nolan, like you. And Nolan's like, yeah, like, he, in a lot of sense, is happy to figure it out kind of at the time. And I think you can see that in his images because they don't seem that carefully composed sometimes. He is happy to, he wants to put the film together in editing. It will make sense there. We'll find what we find. And it's interesting because in that final fight scene, the phrase classic intensified continuity came to me. Like, what is this? Which intensified continuity is not a classic filmmaking style, although it is now kind of David Bordwell.
30 years old.
David Bordwell came up with it, I think, 20 years ago, the phrase. So, like, it has a history, right? But this is classic intensified continuity. Each shot shows you one thing, it moves on to the next one. It's very fast.
It's not Bourne type of editing, though.
In what sense? I mean, it's not as good as Bourne was, but the Bourne, I think, is the reason that intensified continuity became something that you could identify and Bordwell spoke about was because it was such a clear example of a new way in which films were being made, and a very good one. This may be a less good example.
Well, I'm not sure
of
it is a good one. I personally don't like it when you have 50 shots at kind of gunshots paced.
No, I mean a good example of it, not a good type of filmmaking. But like Bourne was the reason.
I love the Bourne films, but I don't like that type of editing, and this is not like that. Actually,
really?
No, I don't think it is like that. Kind of. But it's not exciting, and I think to me the contrast is really between the scene where they get into Troy with the Trojan horse, and you have this editing where you cut from the wheels being turned, the door opening, and then people being shot, and then the wheels, and are they going to or is the door going to be open in time? And that is very exciting to
classic
watch.
cross-cutting.
Yes, exactly. Right. So the last scene for me doesn't have any of that excitement because also there are too many people. The only foci is the Robert Pattinson character downstairs, right? And then the guy trying to drop arms from upstairs, and the Tom Holland character. Yeah, everybody else is amorphous,
and I think
yet they've got to kill them all, right?
I think there is too little sense of, clearly when the guy's trying to drop the arms through, it's important to stop him because you don't want other people being armed. Odysseus is the only one with a weapon here, and as he does, I don't think there's enough of a sense of the fight has changed now. We need it just goes on and on and on, and for a film that is so good at structure in the way it's telling you its story and how good it is at moving you between through time and space, it's bad at it there.
I think it is a very bad scene because the killing of the Robert Pattinson character is not dramatic enough, right? It almost happens too quickly. So he's hiding and hiding and hiding, but actually then, when Odysseus gets to him, is like a few words, the thing in the mouth, and I mean, that should have been some kind of grand culmination of something, right? And it isn't given that weight. And likewise, the fight upstairs with Tom Holland, that should have charted a progress or a change of, that character from a boy into a man, right? That fight should have kind of, demonstrated that transformation, and it doesn't.
I mean, when they're leaving at the end, Odysseus goes off with Penelope to the west. They chase the setting sun, whatever, and she says, Telemachus will be king, and you're going, can he be? he wouldn't have been able to fight any of those people on his own. I mean, okay, a lot of them are dead now. But, like, is he still trying to be a king? We haven't seen this person become the person who needs to... I think, his character lacks.
It's a very badly thought out character, because you could have shown him develop alliances, strategy, the way that his father did with the kitchen staff and the shepherd, and like kind of also kind of being a leader is about building all those relationships and being able to mobilize them, right? You never get quite that's never really shown, and that's not the actor's fault. That is kind of the way that the character is embedded here in the narrative, which I think is too narrowly focused on Odysseus, really, which is I mean, that is what the film is about, but I think I think it's a problem in the writing, actually. Like, it wouldn't have taken much to just build those things, really. Visually, you wouldn't have had to say anything, or no dialogue is necessary. Why doesn't the son have some kind of relationship with the traitorous slave girl, or with the loyal kitchen staff? You show him, having a relationship with the shepherd, training him, but what's that about? And also, the other thing that I found kind of unsatisfying, in terms of what it gives, is the whole John Bernthal,
the Menelaus. Agamemnon's brother, I think.
So obviously you need to bring Helen of Troy into that and so on. But actually, that also should have been I mean, if there's something being told there about development or change or, complexities to the Tom Holland character, I missed them.
And also, I was very unclear on what Menelaus was kind of here for. I mean, is the implication he attacked Helen of Troy, he scarred for some reason? If that's story, I'm not aware of it. I don't think it's explained in the film. We get that line of dialogue which is so clunky, where they talk about how Agamemnon died. I think they tell Telemachus, and she says, my twin sister Clytemnestra, just to show, just to explain it, why in the shot you're seeing, it's also Lupita Nyong'o. So clumsy. Well, I mean, why is that necessary? But anyway, I didn't understand kind of what we were supposed to be getting at that, and why we were being told this little family thing. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe that will become clearer on second viewing for me. I think the audience response was so interesting to me, because it was completely sold out. And I did feel that there was an energy in the room that everybody was like riveted, really. Like kind of, and then at the end of the film, there was a smattering of applause, very unusual.
Other people tried to make a bit of applause happen.
That's right, but it didn't quite take off.
Nah.
So, but there was a smattering of applause. Kind of people applauded at the end.
A little bit.
Yeah, that was interesting. So I loved it. And I'm keen to see it again.
It's interesting, we were talking about Disclosure Day last time, and you were talking about how the film was being sold on the back of Steven Spielberg, more so, or at least equally, to his actors. And they were, Emily Blunt is as big as a woman gets in film.
Not equal to his actors at all. I mean, I remember being quite shocked, because, for months beforehand, you'd have Spielberg and Disclosure, big posters all over the place. And then, behind the veil, you have the faces of Emily Blunt and
whoever it was,
the British actor. I forget his name now. Right? And they're both big stars, particularly Emily Blunt. I mean, if you don't think that the name of Emily Blunt on a poster can bring people in, right? Like, you're nuts, right? It was almost like it was completely negligible that the film commercially, that these people were in it, which is absurd.
Well, the same thing's going on here, right? Although, there's been a lot of promotional material, these interviews and things with Matt Damon and Anne Hathaway and Tom Holland chatting about it. So there is that. But people are there for a Christopher Nolan film. Sure. Christopher Nolan has a massive, massive name, as big as his stars. People, like, if someone else is doing the Odyssey, it's less interesting. But, I don't think someone else doing the Odyssey is going to pack out a cinema like this did.
But believe me,
people know that this is an event.
I've been watching YouTube, and the publicity of the stars is relentless. I've seen interviews with Anne Hathaway and Matt Damon and Lupita Nyong'o and like Safdie and kind of everybody. And sometimes all of them are together, and sometimes one appears in the GQ, and the other, like
There's
the
a
whole
huge
world knows who's in this film, right?
There's
Like,
a huge amount of it, but this is not the first film that's had that kind of promotional sort of push, and it's done that with its actors. Lots of films do that, and yet this is bringing, this is selling out the cinema. Kind of, and I think it's partly that Christopher Nolan's name is so huge, and he has this kind of string of hits that people love. And I think the IMAX thing has a lot to do with that. Even if people aren't seeing it in IMAX, even IMAX Digital as we saw it in, it's amazing. Has that allure because it is the sign of someone who is taking that work extremely seriously and wants it to be the thing that the best that it can be, sort of thing. I think that's the kind of that's how IMAX, to go back to the way we started talking about IMAX. That's kind of how it's trying to sell itself as the true cinematic experience, the best of cinema. You want to see a film, you want to see it filmed with IMAX cameras, with IMAX approved. And he is the poster boy for IMAX. Well, and people do recognise that.
It looks amazing. It rewards it. I mean, it was a real aesthetic experience to see, such kind of beautiful and expressive images. And as you say, and I think this is right, the film has a rhythm. I was kind of, thinking, why am I not bored? And actually, it was just because it kept moving in such a kind of, it had this flow, really. It just kind of pulled me along.
It does keep moving really, really well.
And it looks beautiful throughout. And, sometimes you're just marveling at a landscape or the colors in the sea, like those scenes with Charlize Theron. It was like all those different types of blue that, you see this amazing beach and then like the sea and the horizon.
Yeah, they bump up the saturation for that to make it look so idyllic.
It was beautiful.
It's fairly grey the rest of the time.
Yes, but then you'll get an orange sail or an orange reddish sail, or I mean the use of colour is fantastic, really.
I think the colour is it's intensified when it needs to be, like the siege of Troy, kind of at night and then bathed in kind of red and fire and stuff. Like it's very much intensified there, and it pays off. If the whole film's like that, you don't get that sense of where you don't get that rhythm to it, I suppose. There is a rhythm to the way that colour's used, and a lot of the time we're not doing a massive expressive amount with this, but that's because when we are doing that, it pays off more. I think that's the way. I think rather like those shots that I talk about where you can tell this is a shot that's in the director's head. He has to see it this way. They come along every now and again, and they are more impactful for it in a way. Maybe that's making an excuse for what is otherwise a little more mediocre, but it's also true.
I mean, I think, to be honest, there's little that's mediocre in this film for me. Those scenes with Anne Hathaway behind the screen, and then how so many of their conversations, take place with like the faces blurred, in this kind of very expressive way where nothing is being cleared, things are being obscured, the screen functions in all of those ways. Or there's like these beautiful moments in conversations of two shots, where the focus alters in very meaningful ways, right? So you have this two shot, and Matt Damon is in focus at one point, and then there's Zendaya, right? Like
a lot of very fast focus pulling.
Yeah, it's kind of so kind of interesting, really, and kinetic and expressive. So
I'm not sure that IMAX does deep focus very well. I think that may be one reason.
Maybe. I mean, there were moments where you felt the film was out of focus, right? And that it would come into focus. I noticed that more, and I don't know, in battle sequences because what I'm talking about, it was very well done. Yeah, there's a very fast focus pull from one character to another. Yeah, but there were moments where you felt the film came into focus in ways that wasn't, didn't feel intentional, right?
Yeah. I also felt that about the focus pulling between characters at one or 2 points. There was one shot where the camera racks focus onto Robert Pattinson from whoever it was on, and it takes a little while. Like his line has begun before the camera's got there, sort of thing. And sometimes these are like, okay, these are little flaws that you accept because maybe the take was good in other ways, all that kind of stuff. Like these things don't necessarily matter hugely. did kind of notice it, though, I must say.
I think the film is a massive success. It's greatly entertaining. It's taking, like I said, these stories that are thousands of years old and kind of making them newly relevant in very interesting ways. It looks beautiful. It moves incredibly well. It feels like an aesthetic experience to watch it on a big screen, and it has some of the faults that we agree on. But I mean, it's a massive achievement. I mean, it's I think extraordinary. It's an extraordinary achievement, and his most entertaining film yet, in my view.
More so than Inception.
More so than Inception. More so than any of the Batman films. Yeah.
I disagree with that, I must say. I certainly find Inception more entertaining. I would not put as one of my favourites of his. And when you talk about it kind of having contemporary relevance, I think it's easy to overblow that a bit. I mean, the whole thing about this Zeus' law being lost is, in the modern world, we've stopped being nice to each other. We've stopped learning how to respect each other. Well, so far so banal.
Well, I don't agree. And it's interesting because it is being received that way. I mean, all the accusations of wokeism, is because it does kind of go into all of these things. Now, you could argue that they're banal, but I think you'd have to make a bigger case. I don't think it's banal at all. I thought it was very kind of moving, really. Yeah.
Fair enough.
So, mixed views here?
Yeah.
Different views?
Yeah.
Yes. I found it, hugely entertaining, and I'm very much looking forward to seeing it in proper IMAX in 3 or 4 weeks' time.
I look forward to letting you.
All right. Well, on that note, we're eavesdropping at the movies, and we are on
Apple Podcasts, Audible, Spotify, SoundCloud, YouTube, and YouTube Music. On social media, we're on Facebook and Twitter at Eavesdrop Movies, and Instagram, Eavesdropping at the Movies, and the website is eavesdroppingatthemovies.com.
Thank you all very much for listening.
Bye-bye.